Amidst the everyday hustle and bustle of a vibrant city, we meet a protagonist whose unpretentious style is manifested through a casual hoodie. At first glance, he appears to be just another ordinary person, but he hides a very different reality. His path leads him to a luxury showroom, an environment where sophistication and exclusivity dominate the scene. There he meets the manager of a renowned car dealership, a man who, by hastily judging him, completely ignores the protagonist's true status. This initial interaction, marked by misunderstandings and prejudices, sets the stage for a jaw-dropping revelation, exposing surprising secrets about the man who, despite his modest appearance, possesses everything many only dream of. The sun shone intensely over the Prestige Motors parking lot, casting blinding reflections on the luxury vehicles perfectly aligned at the entrance. The dealership, located in the heart of Scottsdale, Arizona, seemed like a true oasis of elegance and sophistication amidst the desert heat. Daryl parked his modest SUV in a discreet spot at the back, away from curious eyes. His vehicle was a practical choice, showing no signs of ostentation. Dressed in a simple grey hoodie, worn jeans and ordinary sneakers, he exuded the appearance of someone who would go unnoticed in any crowd. But that was exactly the intention. As he walked towards the main entrance, Daryl paused to observe the gleaming facade of the dealership, a true symbol of status for those who frequented it. He knew that with his modest appearance, he would hardly be noticed as anything beyond an ordinary customer, which was exactly what he wanted. He sought to understand the inner workings of his new acquisition without the influence his title as owner would bring. Upon crossing the glass doors, the contrast between the scorching heat outside and the coolness of the showroom was palpable. The air conditioning blew gently, carrying a subtle scent of high-quality leather and automotive wax. Inside, the environment was impeccably designed, with cars that looked more like works of art shimmering under precise lighting. A group of employees was gathered near the reception, immersed in a relaxed conversation accompanied by light laughter. The friendly energy quickly diminished as soon as Daryl entered. The employees' gazes turned towards him, sweeping him from head to toe in a silent and swift analysis. His casual hoodie and sneakers seemed to provoke a type of instant judgment, one that came from assumptions based on appearances. Daryl, however, maintained his relaxed expression, ignoring the discomfort that permeated the air. He knew that these moments said more than words, and his mission there was to observe every detail. It was then that she appeared. Susan, a middle-aged woman whose posture radiated authority, walked through the showroom with determined steps. Her impeccable blazer and high heels gleamed with professionalism, while the clipboard firmly held under her arm completed the image of absolute efficiency. Her smile was courteous, but there was something almost calculated in her expression, as if she was already forming a judgment before even approaching. "Can I help you?" Susan asked, her voice polished, but with a tone that seemed to weigh each word. Daryl looked up at her and responded with a calm smile. "I'm just having a look around." His response was simple but laden with intention, as he knew exactly what to expect next. Susan's eyes narrowed, scanning him once again. Her polite smile turned into something more tense, almost condescending. "Thinking of buying something?" she continued, the doubt in her tone sounding like a subtle challenge. "Something like that," he replied, maintaining his light and carefree tone while observing her reaction. Susan tilted her head slightly, as if pondering the legitimacy of his response before continuing. "Well, we deal with high-end vehicles here. Most require pre-qualification. Maybe I can suggest something more appropriate." She was interrupted by a call from an employee in the background. But before leaving, she ensured her eyes remained on him, as if fearing Daryl might touch something inappropriate. "You're assuming I'm not qualified?" Daryl asked with a slight raise of his eyebrow, his voice remaining calm but clearly intentional. Susan hesitated for a moment before regaining her impeccable composure. "No, of course not," she replied, the smile returning to her face. "I'm just trying to save you time." Daryl let the response hang in the air, observing how she maintained her facade of professionalism while her eyes betrayed a hint of discomfort. He glanced away to a silver sports coupe, admiring the car's aggressive aerodynamics and the vehicle's impeccable shine. Approaching the car, He lightly ran his hand over the door handle, as if gauging his interest. "Nice car," he commented casually, casting a sideways glance at Susan. "Please refrain from touching the vehicles," she responded quickly, her tone slightly sharper. "Perhaps when you're ready for a serious consultation, we can schedule an appropriate time. For now, I suggest I show you something more affordable." Darrell laughed lightly, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the kind of reaction that masked silent disapproval. He turned to Susan, maintaining his impeccable composure. "What would you recommend for someone like me?" Susan blinked, clearly surprised by the direct question, but quickly recovered. "Maybe something more economical," she suggested, with a slight tension in her voice. "I can guide you to a used vehicle dealership that will likely better meet your needs." Darrell maintained his smile, but his eyes revealed he had seen enough. "Interesting assumption," he replied calmly, letting the comment linger like an uncomfortable truth. For a moment, Susan's mask faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. With an almost mechanical nod, she announced, "I'll bring a list of options," and left with brisk steps, her heels clicking on the polished floor as she disappeared among the gleaming cars. Darrell remained standing in the showroom, watching Susan walk away with determined steps. His expression was enigmatic, revealing neither discomfort nor simple intrigue. He turned his attention back to the silver coupe in front of him, the reflection of his face looking back at him in the impeccably polished finish. "This day is going to be interesting," he murmured to himself, almost as if he foresaw the events to come. With his hands tucked into his pockets, he began to circle the showroom. His eyes wandered over the perfect lines and luxurious curves of the displayed cars. Despite his calm exterior, he was absorbing every detail, including the occasional glances he still received from the staff, as if they were trying to decipher his presence there. It was nothing new for Darrell to deal with judgments based on appearances. It was almost a social experiment he frequently experienced, and moments like this always revealed more about others than about himself. A few minutes later, Susan returned. This time she held the clipboard so tightly, it seemed to be her shield against any discomfort. Her smile was as stiff as her posture. "All right," she began, stopping a few steps away. "I've compiled some options that might be more suitable for your situation." Darrell raised an eyebrow, interested, and tilted his head slightly. "My situation?" "Yes," she replied, her tone mixing condescension and professionalism. She handed over a printed sheet, listing used vehicles, each with detailed descriptions and prices significantly lower than the cars occupying the showroom. "These are more affordable, reliable, and economical models, certainly practical for someone like you." Taking the list, Darrell quickly examined the presented models: a used sedan, an old SUV, and a compact hybrid that seemed to have seen better days. He barely contained a smile, folding the sheet and placing it in his pocket without giving it much attention. "I appreciate the effort," he said calmly, his tone genuine but revealing little. For a brief moment, Susan seemed disconcerted. She clearly expected a different response, perhaps even a bit of frustration. However, Darrell remained unfazed, which only increased her discomfort. Leaning on her hips, she slightly bent forward, as if about to confide something important. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice as if revealing an inconvenient truth. "I'm just trying to be realistic. Prestige Motors isn't for everyone. I don't want to waste your time." Darrell met her gaze, his expression remaining calm, but his voice carried an unexpected weight as he responded, "And what exactly makes you think I'm not your customer?" Susan's hesitation was almost imperceptible, but it was there. In the brief seconds, she reconsidered the question before answering. "I've been doing this for a long time," she said, trying to sound confident. "I've learned to identify when someone is out of their depth." Darrell softly repeated her words, as if pondering them. "Interesting." Susan seemed to catch the underlying tone of his response, but maintained her stance. "I'm being honest," she insisted. "It's better to be straightforward now than to let someone leave here disappointed later." Darrell let out a brief laugh, but without emotion. "Honest? I like honesty," he said, his tone taking on an almost provocative air. He paused, allowing the words to hang in the air before adding, "How about this? Let me talk to the owner. Maybe we can sort this out directly. Susan's eyebrows arched, and for the first time she seemed genuinely confused. The owner? That's right, Darrell said casually, as if it were an obvious suggestion. I'd like to speak with them. Susan's smile became almost forced. Well, that's not possible today. The owner isn't available for casual visits. They have other commitments. Very busy people, you know how it is. Darrell shook his head slightly, his smile remaining. Then maybe you could call them. I'm sure they'd like to know I'm here. Susan's smile hardened and her patience began to show cracks. Sir, I'm trying to be polite, but this is getting a bit out of hand. I have other clients to attend to. If you're genuinely interested in buying something, we can schedule a consultation with one of our sales consultants. Otherwise, Darrell tilted his head, his voice remaining calm but carrying a firm tone. Otherwise, Susan hesitated for a moment before completing, I'll have to ask you to leave. The sentence hung in the showroom, laden with almost palpable tension. Darrell remained still, his gaze fixed on hers, showing neither hurry nor discomfort. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and began scrolling through his contacts. All right, he said calmly. I'll make the call myself. Susan's forehead furrowed in confusion. What are you doing? Darrell smiled slightly as he brought the phone to his ear. Calling the owner, it shouldn't take long. Susan's confidence wavered, and her expression became a mix of confusion and discomfort. The surrounding employees discreetly stopped to watch, their conversations interrupted by the unfolding scene. Darrell raised a finger, signaling just a moment while speaking on the phone. Yes, it's me. I'm at the dealership. It's all fine. Just a small misunderstanding. Can you let them know I'm here? After ending the call, he put the phone away and turned to Susan with a calm smile. They'll be here soon, he said simply. Susan stood frozen, her eyes fixed on Darrell as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. Who exactly did you call? She finally asked, her voice laden with incredulity. Darrell, however, remained calm, diverting his gaze to the showroom around him, where everyone was now paying attention to the scene. He didn't respond immediately, allowing the tension to build. I think we'll all find out soon, he replied, his tone slightly playful but with an implicit weight that didn't go unnoticed. The showroom seemed frozen in time. Susan moved uncomfortably, adjusting her posture, but her behavior betrayed growing unease. The clipboard in her hand seemed like a safe harbor as her fingers tightly closed around it. On the other hand, Darrell was beside a luxury SUV, appearing oblivious to the weight of the tension. His casual posture was a key element in everyone's discomfort around him, including the employees who murmured among themselves and exchanged furtive glances. The silence was broken by the sound of the main doors opening. A well-dressed man in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit entered the showroom. His polished shoes made a slight sound as they touched the polished floor, and his presence immediately drew everyone's attention. His serious expression softened upon meeting Darrell, and a warm smile lit up his face. Mr. Carter, the man said, his voice filled with respect as he extended his hand. Darrell shook his hand firmly, a controlled smile on his lips. Thank you for coming, Alex, he replied calmly. The effect was immediate. Susan's clipboard nearly fell from her hands, and her eyes darted between Alex and Darrell, clearly trying to piece things together. Wait, Mr. Carter, she stammered, her voice hesitant. Alex, the regional director of the dealership, turned to her. His friendly smile turned into something more professional, almost cold. Susan, I see you've already had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Carter, he said, his voice carrying a slight reprimand. I didn't realize, Susan replied, the confusion on her face quickly giving way to visible alarm. Alex didn't hesitate. For you didn't notice? Mr. Carter is the new owner of Prestige Motors, he announced with a firm tone that echoed through the showroom. The ensuing silence was deafening. All eyes were fixed on Darrell, whose expression remained unshaken. Susan stood motionless, her clipboard now pressed against her chest as if it were a shield. I'm sorry, she stammered, her voice almost a whisper. I didn't know. Darrell took a step forward. His calm presence, but loaded with authority, seemed to fill the space. You didn't know, he asked, his voice gentle but with underlying firmness. "You didn't know that someone like me could be the owner of a place like this, that I could belong here?" Susan tried to respond, but her words didn't come. The shame on her face was evident. "I didn't mean—" Darryl raised his hand, interrupting her. "It's all right, Susan," he said, his voice serene. He took another step, now only a few meters away from her. "But let me ask you something. If I weren't the owner, would you have treated me differently? Would you have given me the same respect you would give someone entering here in a suit and tie?" Susan's silence was a sufficient response. Darryl nodded slightly, as if confirming what he already knew. He turned to Alex, his voice taking on a resolute tone. "Gather everyone in the conference room. I think it's time we have a conversation about how things work around here." A few minutes later, the team was gathered in an elegant conference room decorated to impress clients and partners. But at that moment, the modern environment felt suffocating. Susan sat near the back, now completely shrunk, her confident air replaced by evident nervousness. Darryl took the place at the head of the table, his firm posture and undeniably dominant presence. Alex was near the door, watching attentively as the team murmured quietly. When Darryl cleared his throat, the murmuring ceased. His gaze swept the room, observing each employee before beginning. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," he said, his voice measured and firm. "For those who don't yet know, my name is Darryl Carter, and as of last month, I am the new owner of Prestige Motors." The announcement elicited some surprised reactions, with employees exchanging glances as they absorbed the information. Susan slumped further into her chair, avoiding eye contact. "I came here today dressed casually for a reason," Darryl continued, his voice filling the room. "I wanted to understand how this dealership operates when no one knows who I am. I wanted to see how any customer would be treated upon walking through these doors." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "What I experienced today was disappointing," he said, his tone firm but without losing his calm. "I wasn't judged by what I could bring to this dealership, but by what I seemed to be. This needs to change." The silence that followed was heavy, and everyone awaited what would come next. Susan fidgeted uncomfortably in her chair, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Her face was red, reflecting the mix of shame and embarrassment that consumed her. Darryl's eyes briefly passed over her before turning to the rest of the team. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice carrying a calm authority. "This isn't just about me," he began. "It's about every person who walks through these doors, every customer who for some reason doesn't fit the preconceived idea of what someone who buys luxury cars should be like. We need to do better." One of the younger salespeople, sitting near the center of the table, hesitated before raising his hand. Darryl nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead." "Mr. Carter," the man began, his voice nervous, "I think most of us try to treat customers fairly, but sometimes it's hard not to make assumptions." Darryl nodded slowly, his eyes taking on a thoughtful expression. "I understand what you're saying," he replied. "We all have biases, even if we don't want to admit them. But here's the issue. It's not enough to just try to be fair. We have to actively challenge those biases. We need to create an environment where everyone, without exception, feels respected." He paused, allowing his words to reverberate through the room. Prestige Motors has built a reputation for excellence, but true excellence isn't just in the vehicles we sell, it's in the experience we provide. From today onwards, that experience will be built on 3 fundamental pillars: respect, inclusion, and fairness. There was a wave of silent agreement in the room, but Darryl noticed some cautious glances. His gaze landed on Susan, who was visibly shrunk, as if trying to disappear into her chair. He softened his tone slightly as he called her. "Susan, I'd like to give you the opportunity to speak. Is there something you'd like to say?" All eyes turned to her, the weight of attention making the moment even more difficult. Susan hesitated, her voice almost inaudible when she finally spoke. I made a mistake," she admitted, her tone laden with regret. "I judged you wrongly, and for that I'm truly sorry." Darryl nodded slowly, his expression inscrutable. "Thank you for saying that," he responded, his voice calm but firm. "I hope this experience serves as a reminder for all of us. Because change starts with accountability. He turned back to the group, his posture firm. To ensure this change happens, we will implement new training programs. I want this dealership to be an example of how a customer should be treated, with dignity, respect, and impartiality. If anyone here has any issues with that, this is the time to speak up. The ensuing silence was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. Darrell allowed the pause to extend, making it clear that his words were final. He then continued, his voice taking on a closing tone. "Good," he said. "I'm glad to see we're all on the same page. Change can be uncomfortable, but it's necessary, and Prestige Motors will be an example of how to do it the right way." Darrell took a step away from the table, leaning slightly while resting his hands on its edge. "I want to make one thing clear. I didn't come here today to humiliate anyone. I came to understand the culture I inherited and identify how we can improve it." He looked directly at Susan, but his tone softened even more. "Susan, you're an experienced manager. I'm sure you've worked hard to get where you are, but today was a wake-up call, for you and for all of us." Susan looked up to meet his gaze for the first time, her shoulders trembling slightly. "I understand," she said, her voice trembling but full of sincerity. "I was wrong, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Darrell nodded. "I believe in second chances," he said, "but responsibility comes first. We'll have an individual conversation about the next steps. For now, let's focus on the future." Turning to the team, he concluded, "We're not just selling cars here. We're building trust, creating relationships, and representing a standard of excellence. If you're committed to that, I'll be by your side every step of the way." This time the murmurs of agreement were louder and more genuine. The initial tension was replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Even Alex, who had remained quiet near the door, gave a slight nod of approval. Darrell let out a small smile, a smile that conveyed both relief and determination. "All right then, let's get back to work. And remember, the way we treat people is more important than any car we sell." As the employees began to leave the room, Susan hesitated near the door. She approached Darrell, her hands nervously twisting. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice low, "I want to thank you for giving me the chance to do better. I won't disappoint you." Darrell watched her for a moment before responding, his voice firm but encouraging. "I hope you're serious, Susan. Actions speak louder than words, but I believe people can change if they really want to." She nodded solemnly. "I do." Darrell saw her leave before turning to Alex. "Schedule a meeting with the team for next week," he said. "I want to ensure everyone is aligned with what's expected from now on." Alex smiled, the respect evident in his expression. "You did it, boss." Back in the showroom, Darrell looked at the perfectly aligned cars, their shiny surfaces reflecting the soft afternoon light. He knew the work would be hard, but he felt optimistic. It wasn't just about selling cars, it was about building something bigger. A place where every person was judged by their character, not by their appearance. Darrell was ready to lead that way.